So here is the one major headline, in case you missed it last week. Amazon announces 14,000 people are laid off from their company. And here are the headlines for the past year. Meta cuts 600 jobs. UPS eliminated 34,000 roles. Estimates could be as high as 48,000 roles. Salesforce, it cut 4,000 workers this year, and Microsoft cut 15,000 employees so far this year. Now, the common thread with all of these, with all the layoffs, is that they are being blamed on artificial intelligence, at least at first. But there's a new narrative that's coming about, especially after Amazon announced their layoffs, which were at first attributed to AI. But then on Thursday, Andy Jassy had his earnings call for Amazon, said it wasn't all related to artificial intelligence. It was actually almost all related to culture. And Amazon culture itself, that can be a whole nother episode or series by itself. But then in the news also, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella actually had announced the company plans to increase its headcount eventually. But the new hires will have a more leveraged approach through the use of AI tools like Microsoft 365 and GitHub Copilot. And he was quick to note that this does not mean former employees have increased their negotiating power, but rather that the new workforce will actually be expected to achieve this greater output per person using AI. Now, there are hundreds of new headlines this past week that now say it's not AI to blame for all of the recent layoffs, which is an interesting story. But the layoffs itself are actually much more complicated than what you're reading in the headlines. Because here is the thing. AI is a tool. It's not a takeover. And we've been using it for years before it was actually in the headlines. It's actually what NASA used to find space rocks like 3I Atlas. It's what radiologists are using to spot cancer cells. It's what your phone uses every time you unlock it. So it's actually nothing new. What changed wasn't the technology, it was actually just the visibility. OpenAI, back in 2022, dropped ChatGPT, and suddenly everyone got to play with it. Now that made AI feel like a revolution overnight. And I'm not sugarcoating it, because AI, it has its usefulness. It writes, it summarizes, it even codes sometimes better than humans. And I say sometimes. Still needs a little guidance, still needs a little work, but you get the idea. But here's the thing. Anyone that's actually used AI knows it can be helpful, but it's not perfect. It's actually far from perfect. It's still a tool, and right now it needs us way more than we need it. But let's be real. When you're hearing AI layoffs, and you're one of the people who just lost their job, that's not some abstract debate anymore. So before we go any further, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the pain, because that's real. There are people today who are actually feeling the pain of AI, and I'm talking about those software engineers and coders. They've been hit hard, if not the hardest. Job posting for developers dropped by over 30% between 2023 and 2025, according to the Pragmatic Engineer. And tech unemployment, it's also ticked up too. It's not huge, believe it or not, but enough that recent grads are actually starting to feel it, and universities, at least some of them, are even reporting computer science majors struggling to find their first jobs. And hit even harder are the creatives. Illustrators, copywriters, translators. Many are already losing work directly because of AI tools. The Society of Authors found that more than a third of jobs like translators and over a quarter of illustrators have seen work just disappear when generative AI actually showed up. Even finance is getting a little squeezed. Certain analysis and reporting roles are being streamlined, which is basically corporate speak for software is doing at least part of the work now. So in short, there are people feeling it now, today. But there is a new trend, a new trending narrative that I'm noticing that says the job market actually mostly looks the same. And I know that sounds like it's in direct conflict with what you're seeing in the news. But one thing I learned at my time at Amazon, where I spent over a decade building tech tools to solve large-scale problems, is that the data, it can give you more of a realistic picture of what's going on, even if that picture is slightly lagging. What I mean is, the big picture doesn't show a total collapse. It does, however, show turbulence and shifts that are occurring that you can see right now. In some industries and some jobs are actually getting hit harder and earlier than others. But the others, they're just waiting their turn at this point. And here's the data that I'm actually talking about. The Yale Budget Lab actually tracked 33 months of job data since ChatGPT actually launched. So if AI were causing this mass broad destruction, we'd see spikes in unemployment in what they call high exposure jobs. Things like office support, writing, finance, that kind of stuff. But the line actually stayed flat. The job mix today looks almost identical to 2021. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what the data says, and you can see it right here. So on a macro level, the whole US labor market, we're not seeing the AI earthquake just yet. At least we're not seeing it in the numbers. But the micro level, the small level, the individual careers and specific roles, that's where the cracks are actually starting to show up. And that's the part the headlines are actually skipping over. Because here is the uncomfortable truth. Not every layoff that gets labeled AI related actually is. And not every safe job will stay safe forever. Because once companies figure out actually how to cut smarter, that's when you'll start actually seeing the movement expedite. But the why right now, that's where it gets a little tricky. So let's talk about what I like to call the AI blame game. Because right now, every company that lays off people seems to have the same script, just this repeated version that just keeps happening. We're cutting jobs to invest in AI. That may sound bold, but if you actually read between the lines, it's not innovation, it's more public relations. If a CEO says, we've overhired and now we're cutting back, that sounds like bad press. If they say we're becoming more efficient with AI, suddenly they sound visionary. It's the same layoffs, just a different story being told. And economists actually have a term for this. It's called technological justification. And it's basically when a company wraps cost-cutting in innovation language so it actually sounds like progress instead of cleanup. And I can tell you, no company plays this game better than Amazon right now. So as I mentioned with the Amazon news, Beth Galletti, Amazon Senior Vice President of HR, sends this memo out last week that basically is announcing the 14,000 layoffs. And in it, she actually says Amazon needs to reduce bureaucracy, remove layers, and shift resources to what matters most. That's restructuring talk. But then, in the same breath, in that same memo, she says the generation of AI is the most transformative technology we've seen since the internet. So that question in my mind is, which is it? Is AI replacing people, or are they flattening the org and trimming the fat? Because if you actually check internal notes and analyst coverage, you'll see both stories that are kind of floating around in the ether right now. Because publicly, it's AI, it's reshaping the company. But internally, it's we need to run leaner and cut bureaucracy. And those sound like the same story, but they're not. Because one sounds futuristic and the other sounds like cost management. And here's the part that no one is actually talking about. So think about this. When Amazon says it's investing in AI, that doesn't exactly mean they're hiring more researchers or more automation due to AI. It actually means they're buying things like hardware, GPUs, chips, data centers, and cooling systems to handle the explosion in AI workloads, because even AWS, and that's Amazon's own cloud arm, has admitted they can't keep up with GPU demand. They have had to ration compute power internally while they build new infrastructure. So when you see things like investing in AI in a press release, for instance, part of that money is actually going into metal and silicon, not people. And when you think about it that way, those layoffs actually start looking less like a tech revolution and more like a budget shift to be able to pay for all of this stuff. Now, obviously, that doesn't lessen the sting of losing your job. And I know from personal experience, I worked at Amazon during the pandemic, and I was there when they did their first layoffs of 27,000 people, because I can tell you that was a gut-wrenching experience. I myself have a family. And during the pandemic, I worked a lot of hours. I sacrificed a lot of time from my family, and then getting the news, which also wasn't directly from Amazon, but I was hearing about it from mainstream media. Your reward for all your time and service, which at that point was over a decade, we're promoting you to customer. That was the reward. So when a reorg hits, you get emails that are full of lines like shifting resources towards our biggest bets, focusing on high-value initiatives, empowering teams closer to the customer. That sounds all great, I guess, but it really just is the best way of saying we're cutting headcounts from a corporate language standpoint. And believe it or not, Amazon isn't alone in that. You've seen other headlines. You see it across logistics, tech, even finance. Companies overhired during the pandemic. Growth actually slowed and rates went up. And now they're actually trying to do this massive cleanup, this reset, if you will. But AI made us do it just sounds a lot cooler than we misjudge demand. And it works because when they say that, investors love it. They say AI and your stock price gets a little bit of a sugar rush. You say layoffs and everyone starts panicking. Even Amazon said that they were cutting only 14,000 people when they were actually reported to cut 30,000 people. So imagine that actually happening in phases, so they lessen the blow to what you're seeing in the public. So when we actually hear AI layoffs, what's really happening isn't a robots replacing humans situation. It's humans using AI as a shield to make painful cuts that sound like innovation. And this isn't just an opinion. The data backs it up because the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis actually looked at jobs exposed to AI and found some churn, but nothing actually catastrophic. Most of the real losses are actually in clerical and administrative or entry-level roles, areas that were already shaky before generative AI hit. Even Morgan Frank at the University of Pittsburgh found that software engineers, the ones that are actually supposedly being replaced by code, they're not actually all disappearing. But support roles like project management, customer service, those are thinning out. People are being affected, but the pattern looks a lot more like a strategic reshuffling than an actual technological takeover. And that's what's really important to understand here, isn't that AI isn't swinging a hammer at jobs. It's just giving a shiny way to justify the cuts they already wanted to make. Even Martha Gimbel at Yale said that there's this huge gap between what the headlines say and what the data actually shows. Because you got to think about it. Company announcements, those things go viral, but labor statistics don't. So the public hears AI is taking the jobs, but the numbers show something way messier. You have these uneven hits across a few sectors and a lot of storytelling that happens around them. So the next time you actually see one of those AI layoff headlines, just take a breath and ask this one question. Was it really AI, or was it just a business decision with, better marketing? So if AI isn't killing jobs right now, then why does it feel like there's this round, shaking shift that's happening? Why does it feel like we're standing at the edge of something big, even though the numbers still look relatively calm? And that's the weird thing. This part always looks calm, right before the big wave hits and takes you out to the ocean. Economists have actually seen this before, and they call it that lag effect, which makes sense. It's the gap between when a new technology shows up and when it rewires the economy. And that lag, it's usually way longer than anyone actually expects it to be. For instance, when computers first showed up in the 1980s, everyone got panicked, and you saw headlines like, "Clerks are done, typists are gone." But the data actually didn't move for years. And then slowly the jobs changed, they didn't vanish, and productivity actually shot up. And the same thing happened with the internet in the 2000s. You had whole new industries, things like e-commerce and SEO and data analytics. They just popped up. But that took a decade to hit. MIT economists Darren Acemoglu and David Arturo actually modeled this. They found that new tech usually starts with what they call a diffusion delay. The invention lands fast, but adoption crawls. Companies need to reorganize, retrain, and rebuild workflows. And that doesn't happen overnight. And until that actually happens, the disruption barely shows in the stats. Now, doesn't that whole scenario kind of sound familiar? Maybe something happening today? That right there is where we are today with AI. It's everywhere in every conversation, but it's still finding its place in the process. It's in trial runs, it's in pilot programs, it's in side tools, but it hasn't really hit the bloodstream of most businesses yet. And when it does, that shakeup, like I said earlier, won't happen overnight. It will take time because historically it rolls out into 4 stages. You have the first stage called introduction, the second stage called diffusion, the third stage called transformation, and finally maturity. Computers actually took about 15 years to go from niche to necessity. And the internet, much faster, took about 10. And AI will be much faster in this process, but it still needs that time. It needs that digestion period, the lag period. And that's what this calm right now actually is. It's the digestion. Companies are experimenting. They're testing workflows. They're figuring out where humans still add value, and it's the quiet before the major shift actually happens. And so here's where it actually gets a little more interesting, is that the Yale's Budget Lab actually tried to measure this lag across time. They used something called the Occupational Dissimilarity Index. And yeah, that Kind of sounds fancy, but here's what it really means. It actually measures how much the mix of jobs in the economy change from year to year. If the number is high, it means work is shifting fast. Lots of people are moving into new types of roles and old ones are actually fading out. And if it's low, it means most people are still doing the same kinds of jobs as they did before. So think of it like a career earthquake scale. 0 would basically mean total stillness, which translates into everyone is doing the same thing, and a 10 would be this total upheaval. You have whole industries that are basically reinventing themselves. During the personal computer boom in the 1980s, that number actually hit around 8 on a scale of 10. Now that is a serious shake. You had secretaries that basically became admins and typists that turned into data entry clerks. Accountants actually learned things like spreadsheets. It was massive. Then the internet came along in the late 1990s and the index jumped about 5.3. So still a strong wave, but a little slower because that disruption hit office and service work more gradually. And now with AI, believe it or not, it's actually only sitting at 4.7 for now. But that's a movement, not the chaos that you're seeing being reported at the moment. So for context, anything below 5 is actually considered moderate. More like you're seeing the tremors than the actual earthquake. So what that tells us is that, yes, jobs are shifting, but the ground's not cracking open just yet. We're still in the adjusting phase and not the rebuilding phase. If the AI trend follows the same curve as the past disruptions, we could see that number climb sharply to around 7 or 8 range by the early 2030s. But let's talk about us, humans that are involved in the process, because that's really the part of the story that I know I'm interested in. Because the data says one thing, but the data doesn't capture that feeling of checking your inbox every morning and wondering, do I still have a job? Because that's the real story right now. We're not living through a job apocalypse. We're living through a confidence collapse. And I completely understand and get it. I've been through this before. Those restructuring emails, the all hands calls that start with, we got to make tough decisions. It messes with your sense of stability because you start questioning everything. You start questioning your skills, your value, even your timing. But here's the pattern that just keeps showing up whenever you have this new type of technology. Humans always find a way to have it bend towards us, even if that doesn't sound like what's happening in the news right now. When the computer came, people learned spreadsheets and they built IT departments. When the internet came, people learned HTML and created digital marketing. And when the smartphone came, people learned app design and social media strategies. Every single time we found a way to turn the disruption into direction. And that's what's already starting to happen with AI, because if you look close, there's this whole undercurrent of people learning how to work with it, not against it. Teachers are using it to prep lessons faster, and developers are using it to debug, not disappear. Even in finance, you have analysts that are training AI to handle the boring parts of the job so they can focus on judgment and alignment. LinkedIn's own 2025 Future of Work report actually found something wild. Their job postings, the ones that are real anyways, mention AI skills have actually doubled since last year. So not AI replacing, but AI collaborating. And that's the shift that I think we're missing in the headlines. Is the story isn't about machines taking over, it's about people quietly upgrading in the background. Economists at the Brookings Institution actually calls this occupational evolution. Basically, every time tech changes the tools, it also changes what being good at your job actually means. Because in the early computer era, being good at your job actually meant knowing Excel. And in the internet era, it meant knowing digital systems. And in the AI era, it's going to mean knowing how to ask better questions. The most valuable skill isn't coding or writing prompts, it's actually curiosity. It's staying open long enough to spot new lanes before anyone else spots it or rushes into it. So maybe the question isn't, will AI take my job? Maybe a better question is, will I take AI's opportunity before somebody else does? And that's the shift from fear to adaptation, from panic to preparation. That's the truth about this curve we're heading into, is it's going to challenge a lot of people. It's going to force uncomfortable changes, but it's also going to amplify what makes us human. The judgment, the taste, the creativity, the empathy. And that's something that no algorithm has ever truly really mastered, at least not yet. So if you're watching this and you're feeling nervous about your job, you're not wrong for feeling that way. But remember, the headlines are the loudest part of any transition. The reality underneath all of that is slower and messier and full of opportunity if you just stay curious. So here we are. We've gone from fear to facts, from hype to history. And if there's one takeaway from all of this, it's that change doesn't hit like lightning. It builds like weather. And you can feel the shift long before it actually breaks. And right now, AI is still in that build-up phase. It's quietly threading its way through offices, warehouses, hospitals, and studios. It's not replacing people, it's just rearranging the work. And over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see the rearrangement speed up. So here are some key milestones and advancements in the next 5 to 10 years that you should pay attention to. Autonomous AI agents. These will be seen more as core operators in the 5 to 10 year span. And AI agents will evolve from the simple tools to essential operational partners. They will have the capability of handling complex multi-step workflows with minimal human oversight. And these agents are expected to manage everything from administrative tasks and customer interactions to complex supply chain logistics and network diagnostics. Multimodal AI becomes standard. You'll have AI systems that will move beyond processing just single data points or data types like text or images to integrating information across text and visuals and voice and even sensor data. Then you're also going to have progress in common sense reasoning. This is going to be a major research focus, which will be in development for AI that can actually understand and interpret context and nuance. Rather than just processing data, this will lead AIs that can function more effectively in unpredictable, real-world type environments. Revolutionized healthcare and education, because AI will become a standard in diagnostic and personalized treatment plans. It'll be based on genetics, lifestyle, and medical history, and it'll do things like remote patient monitoring. In education itself, AI tutors will offer customized learning experiences and handle administrative tasks, allowing human educators more time to focus on mentorships and critical thinking skills. Integration with quantum computing. The synergy between AI and quantum computing will accelerate problem-solving capabilities exponentially. You're also going to see widespread industrial automation. Look at AI-powered robotics. They will actually become more common in manufacturing and logistics, performing complex assembly tasks with high precision. Think of it like autonomous vehicles, cars, trucks, and drones. One of the things that may take longer to actually formulate is going to be regulations and ethics. Governments and international bodies, they need to establish more clear and more rigorous regulatory frameworks. This is basically just to handle and manage AI risks. And this will focus on things like accountability, transparency, data privacy, and the mitigation of biases, especially for high-risk applications. And then you're just going to see this big workforce transformation, because while AI will automate many routine and repetitive tasks, it will also create new roles focused on AI development, data analysis, ethics, and maybe even a human-AI collaboration. Now, I can't stress this. None of that stuff is guaranteed. It's just my thought process on what the next 5 to 10 years could look like. But the signs are stacking up because investment in AI is massive. And training programs are actually being funded, and that means you, right now, still have that window of opportunity. So what can you do right now to get prepared? I got a few things. Number one, learn how to use the tools. And you don't have to know them perfectly, just enough to speak the language. Now, number two, you need to find where you still add judgment. Because if a machine can do the task, your job is to do the thinking around that task. And then there's stakeholder communication and empathy, because AI can't build trust. It can't navigate office politics or inspire a team. Jobs will increasingly demand high levels of emotional intelligence and also communication skills and the ability to explain complex AI outputs in a human-esque, understandable terms. The most important thing out of all this is just all of us staying connected, because the people who talk, share, and adapt together, they're the ones who are going to spot the next wave first. And most importantly, if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's okay. Everyone in history has felt this way when the world has started to shift. When the typewriter met the computer, when radio met television, when film met streaming. The fear always came first. The next few years, they're not about surviving AI. They're really about shaping it. making sure it actually works for people. But that's the story that we're following here on the ARQIV, because this isn't a tech story. In my opinion, this will always be a human story. And if you want to stay ahead of this story, make sure you subscribe and follow. But until then, just like with AI and trying to stay ahead, stay curious. Most importantly, stay kind. And don't believe the headlines until you've actually seen the data.